Hey class, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at weighted voting systems. So a weighted voting system is just like the voting systems that we had before. Basically like one voter has more of a weight than the other voters. So normally it was one vote to one voter. Now what we're going to do is one voter has more than one votes. So think about like the electoral college that the United States uses. So for North Carolina, they have 15 electoral votes. So whoever wins the state for that presidential election, they get all 15 votes. So North Carolina has a weight of 15, whereas a smaller state like Utah or Wyoming, they only have 3 electoral college votes. So they only get to put in 3 votes for that presidential election. So the way that this breaks down is this is the way all of your weighted voting systems are going to look. Okay, there's going to be the first number is always going to be your quota. That's the number that we have to meet. So in this case, the number that we have to meet in order to pass a resolution for these 4 voters, so we have 4 voters, we usually call them A, B, C, and D. You may see them as like P sub 1, P sub 2, P sub 3, P sub 4, something like that, just the way you can identify which one is which. So what we want to do is some combination of those 4 voters have to reach 6 total votes in order to pass the resolution. If they don't, then it can't pass. If they do, then it does pass. So the first thing we want to identify is the quota, and the quota is always that first number that we have right there. So our quota for that one is going to be 6. Okay, so that's the number. So some combination of these 4 voters has to add to be 6. All right. Then to get the weight of voter C, this is just something we want to identify. So weight of voter A would be 4, weight of voter B would be 3, and so the weight of voter C would be 2. Okay, so you're just identifying the weight, so how much power they have, or how many votes they have for that one person. Veto power, that is something where if they choose to not vote for it, that resolution is not going to go through. So we want to make sure, so what we want to do is we want to look at if I added all these numbers together, if I took away any of them, would it not reach the quota? So the main ones we want to look at are the biggest ones first. If the biggest ones, if we take them out and everybody else still gets, and it still gets to the quota, then that person does not have veto power. So we like to look here. So if I took out 4, let's say 4 decides to not vote for it. So voter A is not going to vote for our resolution, but B, C, and D decide to. So that's 3 plus 2 plus 1, that still reaches 6. So A does not have veto power. Same thing for B. If I took B out, then 4 plus 2 plus 1, that's still going to be 7. That still reaches our quota. So none of these voters have veto power. Now, for instance, if, let's say, our quota was 7, and we took A out, that would be 3, 2, and 1, that would be 6. That would not reach the 7. So then A would have veto power if our quota was 7. So you just got to pay attention and think about the numbers. If we take that person out and the rest of the people vote for it, if it still doesn't get to the quota, then that person has veto power. So they get to they can veto, like the president has veto power. They can, if Congress passes something, the president can still cancel it and not let it go through, not sign it into law. All right, next up we look at is a dictator. Dictator is anybody that has equal to or more than the quota. So however many votes they have, whatever their weight is going to be more than or equal to the quota. In this case, my highest one is 4. It is not bigger than 6 or equal to 6. So there are no dictators in this system. Dummies are anybody that does not have any power at all. So it doesn't matter if they vote for it or not, it's not going to go through. Now this is going to make more sense whenever we get into the next thing, which is called the Banzhaf Power Index. Which if anybody has 0 power there, that person is a dummy. But basically we want to look for the smallest one and think about, is there any coalition that they're in where they're not going to be a useful member, and there is none. And that'll be more obvious in the next round. So there's no dummies. All right, then there's this thing called anarchy. Anarchy in a weighted voting system is whenever both sides of the resolution have more power than the quota. So that means if everybody voted yes, or if a few people voted yes and a few people voted no, if it still gets to the quota on both sides of that argument, then that is anarchy, where both sides have enough power to get past the quota. So in this case, there's none, so it doesn't reach 6. So there's no anarchy. But let's say, for instance, that our quota was something smaller, like 4. If our quota was 4, let's say A could vote for something, and then B, C, and D could vote against it, and both sides would have more than the quota. So that's kind of a problem for us. So that would be, right now we have none, but if our quota was smaller, even like 5, we would then have some anarchy. So you just want to be careful about that. And then gridlock is if nobody gets to the quota. So if I added up all 4 of them, they all wanted to pass something, but it still doesn't get to the quota, that is gridlock. So in this case, if I add up 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, that adds up to be 10. If my quota was 11, then I would have gridlock because we don't get to the quota. So anarchy, both sides get past the quota, so that means our quota is too small. Gridlock, nobody gets to the quota, that means our quota is too big. But in this case, we have a good voting system, so none of those are prevalent. And then this is something that we're going to be calculating a lot, is basically how much power each individual voter has. And we look at how many times they're going to be a critical voter. So first thing we want to do in finding the Banzhaf Power Index, we're using the same voting system that we had before, is we want to first find all the winning coalitions. A winning coalition is whenever we add any of our voters together and it reaches the quota. So if they reach the quota, that is a winning coalition. So I'm going to go ahead and label my voters, so A, B, C, and D. Okay, and I'm just going to start here listing out some winning coalitions. I like to start with the biggest number, so all 4 of them together, that's almost always going to be one of them. So A, B, C, D. That will add, that quota would be, or their power would be 10. So that's a winning coalition. Then I'm going to go to the 3s. So if I add A, B, and C together, so 4 plus 3 plus 2, that's going to be 9. That's past 6. So that's one of our winning coalitions. Then I'm going to go A, B, D. A, B, D, that would add to be 8. So A, B, D. Then A, C, D also works. So as you see, I'm going with 3 letters at a time, so I'm working my way down. It looks like B, C, and D would also work. So B plus C plus D, that's going to be 6, so that reaches it. If I do A and B, that's going to be 7. So I got all my 3s. Now I'm going to go to my groups of 2. Looks like I could do A and C. And I think that's it for the groups of 2. So if I did B and C, that's only 5. C and D is only 3. 4 and 1, that doesn't work. So A and C and A and B, but no B, C. Yep, so that's it. So those are all of our winning coalitions. So that's step number 1. We listed all of our winning coalitions. Next, what we want to do is identify the critical voters. So critical voters are people that have to be in there in order for it to be a winning coalition. If we took them out and it doesn't reach the quota, that person is a critical voter. So they have to be in our winning coalition in order for us to reach the quota. So for A, B, C, and D, what we think about is if I took A out, B, C, and D would still reach 6. So A is not a critical voter, and all of these are smaller than that, so none of them in A, B, C, D are going to be critical voters. But if we look at A, B, C, if I took out A, B, and C only add to be 5. So A would be a critical voter here. So we're going to underline that. So we want to identify them. You can either circle them, underline them, whatever you want to do. I like to underline. And then I'm going to look at B. So if I look at B, if I took out B, A, and C still get to 6. So we're good there. That one's not a critical voter. And C, I have A and B. So A is the only critical voter for that one. Then I look at A and B, A, B, D. So it looks like A, B, D. I'm going to need A. I'm also going to need B, but I'm not going to need D for that one. Same thing with A, C, D. I'm going to need A. I'm going to need C, but I'm not going to need D because A and C could add to be 6, but I don't need D because they're not needed. So A, yep, and C, yeah. And then B, C, D, all of those are needed. It adds to be 6. So if I took out even the D, that would still be a problem. We would only have 5. And then A and B, both of those are going to be critical, and both of these are going to be critical. So remember, critical voters, they have to be in there in order to reach the quota. All right, so now what we want to do is find the total amount of underlines that we have. We're going to label that as T. So all I have to do is count now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So my total is going to be 12. That is going to be my denominator of each person. So I'm going to find the Banzhaf Power Index for each of these voters. So the way that I do that is I now count however many times they were underlined in our winning coalitions, and that's going to be my numerator, and the 12 is going to be my denominator. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 5 out of 12 for A. B is going to be 1, 2, 3, so that's 3 out of 12. And then C is going to be 1, 2, 3, so 3 out of 12. And then D is underlined the once, so that's going to be 1 out of 12. So you see some patterns going on here. If you notice, B and C kind of have the same amount of power according to the Banzhaf Power Index. Even though B had 3 and C had 2, they still in this voting system have the same amount of power. Now A has the most and D has the least. And then talking back to what we talked about earlier, the dummies, anytime you get a power index of 0 for any of these people, that will mean that that person is a dummy. So in this case, even this 1 out of 12, it's not 0, so then we don't have any dummies. But that is how we find the Banzhaf Power Index. If you want to report these as percentages or fractions, that's fine too, but this kind of gives you an idea of how powerful that person is, how many times they were critical to that winning coalition over the whole entire system. And that is the Banzhaf Power Index, and that's weighted voting systems.